Summary report of the Wehrmacht High Command on the operations in the West from May 10th to June 4th. The great battle in Flanders and Artois is over. It will go down in military history as the greatest battle of annihilation of all time, when the German Wehrmacht formed up to achieve a decision in the West on the morning of May 10th. The Führer and Supreme Commander set the strategic goal of forcing a breakthrough through the enemy's border fortifications and south of Namur, thereby laying the prerequisite for the battle of annihilation of the English and French army north of the Aisne and the Somme. At the same time, Holland was to be quickly taken over and thereby eliminated as a base for the intended English operations on land and in the air on the northern flank of the German army. On June 4th, the Wehrmacht was able to report to its supreme commander that this enormous task had been completed. In between lies a heroism of the German soldier and a glory of German leadership, which could only be possible on this scale in a Wehrmacht that is led by one will, animated by an idea, and supported by the enthusiasm and willingness to sacrifice of a united people. A closer look and appreciation of the operations of the Army, Air Force, and Navy must be reserved for a later time. From this brief overview, the German people should only understand how this tremendous victory could come about in such a short time and gain the certainty that the final victory is ours. For months, the German leadership had faced the daily danger that the Allied mobile armies would advance against the Ruhr area under the pretext of aid to Holland and Belgium. This danger had to be forestalled at the last moment on May 10th. It could no longer be countered with an arduous struggle that lasted weeks around the closed border zones and the newly developed fortresses of Holland and Belgium. With the sudden deployment of the German Air Force, which established the security of its own airspace in just a few hours through ruthless attacks on the enemy air forces, it was possible, through a large number of carefully prepared surprise actions by selected units of the Army and Air Force, not only to get bridges under control without being destroyed, but also to take blocking forts that the enemy had previously considered impregnable. It was also possible to use parachute and airborne troops to establish a hold inside the Holland fortress, despite the strongest resistance, and to keep the access gates from the south over the huge bridges near Moerdijk open until tank and motorized units were on the spot, and, together with the Air Force, intervened against Rotterdam. This first break into a fortress area from the air and the rapid relief of these stormtroopers from outside, combined with the simultaneous breakthrough through the Grebeline to the southeast of Utrecht, forced the surrender of Holland on May 14th after a battle that lasted almost 5 days. In the meantime, not only had all the border fortresses and fortified positions in northern and southern Belgium been quickly penetrated, but the enemy armored units that had been thrown at us had also been defeated, and the superiority of the German armored force, its organization, its leadership, and its material had been proven. Charging ahead of the infantry divisions, the Panzer Corps reached the Meuse between Dinant and Sedan on May 13th, and found not only the deep valley in front of them, but also the heavily developed border fortifications in which the French Ninth Army had set up for defense. Contrary to all previous opinions and all calculations of the enemy leadership, the next day the tank troops crossed the river and its border fortifications in an incredibly bold operation, accompanied and followed by infantry divisions that had come in forced marches and were repeatedly supported in an exemplary manner by the Luftwaffe, smashed the enemy defenses and all counterattacks, and made their way to the Oise. This marked a breach in the enemy front. And again, the enemy leadership experienced a surprise that they had thought impossible. The tank and motorized units pushed through to the sea with such speed that they even surprised troops who were still practicing on the parade ground in Abbeville. The German leadership had taken precautions to ensure that a protective band of divisions rolled out in quick succession from the southern border of Luxembourg, the Maginot Line, the Aisne, and the Somme, thereby ensuring that a Marne miracle of 1914 would not repeat. As a result, the mobile units were able to turn north without worrying about their rear, with their left wing grazing along the sea, while on their right flank at Cambrai and Arras, desperate attempts by enemy armored troops to break through failed with heavy losses. As early as May 22nd, it became apparent that all forces still in Artois and Flanders would be destroyed. While the frontal pressure in northern Belgium increased more and more, and threw the bravely fighting Belgians out of Antwerp, the Dial and Dendré positions, our breakthrough army, which had turned north, smashed the French 1st and 7th Armies, overwhelmed the Maubeuge fortress, and took at the left wing Boulogne and Calais, and in the middle the high ground of Vimy and Souchez, which was hotly contested during the World War. When on May 28th, the ring around the remnants of 4 enemy armies from Ostend via Lille Armentières to Grevelia was closed, and the Belgian army only saw the task before it of covering the embarkation of the English Expeditionary Army, which was in full swing, and the destruction of all artificial buildings in the country by the English, the Belgian king decided to capitulate. This did not bring about the fate of the French and English armies and hardly accelerated it. What happened over the next 7 days is not, as English propaganda tries to portray, the heroic retreat of the English army, but rather one of the greatest catastrophes in history. Even though thousands of people have saved their lives, their material and equipment are clearly lying on the streets of Flemish and northern France. On June 4th, Dunkirk fell after a bitter battle. The first phase of this campaign is over. The enormous success was made possible by the unprecedented deployment of the German Air Force, because all the bravery and striking power of the army could only have an impact in the area shielded by our Air Force. From day one, it fought for dominance in the air, destroying the enemy air forces and their ground organization. In addition, it directly and indirectly supported the army in its difficult battle through continuous death-defying attacks with the demoralizing effect of its bombs, as well as through the use of anti-aircraft weapons. It recognized enemy infantry and tank accumulations in good time in their preparation for counterattacks and helped to destroy them. It finally gave the German leadership a current picture of the situation through air reconnaissance flown with courage. It inflicted heavy losses on the Allied forces at sea. The destruction of the fighting morale of the enemy units and the paralysis of the enemy leadership apparatus is its achievement. The full magnitude of the victory in Holland, Belgium, and northern France emerges from the enemy's losses and the extent of the military equipment captured. The losses of the French, English, Belgians, and Dutch in prisoners totaled over 1.2 million men. Added to this is the inestimable number of dead, drowned, and wounded. The weapons and equipment of around 75 to 80 divisions with guns up to the heaviest calibers, armored cars, and motor vehicles of all kinds were destroyed or captured. From May 10th to June 3rd, the German Luftwaffe shot down 1,841 enemy aircraft, including 1,142 in air combat, by Flak 699. At least 1,600 to 1,700 more aircraft were destroyed on the ground. The attempt to rescue the British Expeditionary Force with war and merchant ships also cost the enemy heavy losses at sea. The following were sunk due to bombing raids: 5 cruisers, 7 destroyers, 3 submarines, 9 other warships, and 66 merchant and transport ships. In addition, the following were damaged and partially destroyed by bomb hits: 10 cruisers, 24 destroyers, 3 torpedo boats, 22 other warships, and 117 merchant and transport ships. Through the daring use of light naval forces, 6 destroyers, 2 submarines, 1 transport, 1 auxiliary cruiser, and 1 other warship were sunk. In contrast, the Wehrmacht's own losses from May 10th to June 1st were small in relation to the size of the success. 10,232 officers, non-commissioned officers, and men died a heroic death. The number of missing people is 8,463. The death of a small proportion of these missing persons must still be expected. 42,523 officers, non-commissioned officers, and men were wounded. The German Luftwaffe lost 432 aircraft during the period from May 10th to June 3rd, while the German Kriegsmarine did not lose any ships off the Dutch, Belgian, and northern French coasts. Competing in their courage to attack and endure hardships, often in the fight against superior enemies, all of the Wehrmacht units deployed achieved a feat that is unique in the history of war. The examples of heroic bravery, self-sacrificing fulfillment of duty, and unwavering will to win are countless. They will go down in our history as evidence of German soldiering. In faithful trust in the Führer and Supreme Commander of the Wehrmacht, in the best camaraderie within the armed forces and branches of the Wehrmacht, the German soldier made possible what seemed impossible. Holland and Belgium have surrendered. France and Great Britain's shock armies have been destroyed. One of the greatest victories in world history has been achieved. Greater Germany dominates the entire eastern and southern shores of the North Sea and the Canal. Since the opponents continue to deny peace, the fight will lead to their complete annihilation.
Thank you for listening. Join us also for the subsequent Wehrmacht Blitzkrieg briefing about the fall of France. Subscribe to Major Antonio's channel. We'll get back to you next week. So long.